ॐ भूर्भुवः स्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात् ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः. This is Namaskar my dear friends. This is fourth video on Ramana Maharishi's direct path to liberation. Dive deep within and continuous awareness of the self. It starts with the question, is it necessary to give up worldly desires? Maharshi Ramana replies, why do we desire? Enquire. If you find no real happiness in your desires, then your mind will not be attracted to them. However, subconscious tendencies may tempt you there, but you will return. Why do you want the life of freedom? The fact that you crave it implies that you are bound, but really you are ever free. Know that self and desires will fall away of their own accord. Bring all desires and thoughts to one point within, that is realization. Mind should be still. The bee buzzes noisily around the flower seeking honey. When it finds it, it is silent and still. So it is with a person's soul, which is seeking by desires the one true honey. Question. The difficulty is to be in the thoughtless state and attend to duties. Bhagavan Ramana Maharshi replies, let the thoughtless state be of itself. Do not think of it as pertaining to yourself. When you walk, you take steps involuntarily. Let your other actions happen in the same way. Gradually, concentration will become pleasant and easy, and you will be in that state whether attending to business or whether you sit expressly for meditation. Business will be all the easier for you when your mind is steadied and strengthened by concentration. Question. How can my mind be still if I have to use it more than other people? I want to go into solitude and renounce my work as a headmaster. Maharshi replies, no, you can stay where you are and go on with work. What is the undercurrent which gives life to the mind and enables it to do all this? Work. Why the self? So that it is the real source of your activity. Simply become aware of it during your work and do not forget it. Contemplate it in the background of your mind even while you are working. To do that, do not hurry. Take your time. Keep the remembrance of your real nature alive even while working and avoid haste which causes you to forget. Be deliberate, practice meditation to still the mind and cause it to become aware of its true relationship to the self which supports it. Do not imagine it you who are doing the work. Think that it is the underlying current which is doing it. Identify yourself with this current. If you work unhurriedly, recollectedly, your work or service need not be a hindrance. Question. What is the purpose of all the suffering and evil in the world? Maharshi. Your question is itself an outcome of the suffering. Sorrow makes one think of God. If it were not for the suffering, would you have asked the question? Except for Gyanis, realized beings, everybody from a king to a peasant has a certain amount of sorrow. Even in cases where it seems to be absent, it is only a matter of time. Sooner or later it comes. Also, one may not question sorrow or God at the first blow, but one is likely to at the fifth. We have taken this vehicle, the body, in order to know our real state. Question: how to get rid of egoism? Maharshi replies, just see it for what it really is. That will be enough. It is the ego itself which makes an effort to get rid of itself. So, how can it die? If the ego is to go, then something else must kill it. Will it ever consent to commit suicide? So, first realize what the true nature of the ego is, and it will go of its own accord. Examine the nature of the ego, that is the process of realization. If one sees what one's real nature is, that itself will get rid of the ego. Until then, is it just like chasing one's own shadow? The more one advances, the more distance is the shadow. If we leave our own self, then the ego will manifest itself. If we seek our true nature, then ego dies. If we are in our own reality, then we need not trouble about the ego. Seek your source, find out where the thought I springs from, what object can be surer of, and no more. Then we need not trouble about the ego. If we are in our own reality, then we need not trouble about the ego. Seek your source. Find out where the thought I springs from. What object can we be surer of and no more certainly than ourselves? This is direct. This is direct experience and cannot be described further. If the present I goes, the mind is known for what it is, a myth. What remains is the pure self. In deep sleep, the self exists without the perception of the body or the world, and happiness reigns. Question: once I was very self reliant, but in old age I am afraid people laugh at me. Mercy replied, even when you said you were self reliant, it was not so. You were ego reliant. If you let the ego go, you will achieve real self reliance. Your pride was merely the pride of the ego. So long as you identify yourself with the ego, you will perceive others as individuals too, and then there will be room for pride. Let that drop, and you will drop others' egos too, leaving no more room for pride. So long as there is a sense of separation, one will be afflicted by thoughts. If the original source is regained and the sense of separation is ended, there will be peace. Consider what happens when a stone is thrown up. It leaves its source, is projected up tries to come down and is always in motion until it regains its source where it is at rest. Or look at the waters of the ocean. They evaporate from clouds which are blown about by winds, condense into water and fall as rain. The waters roll down the hilltops in streams and rivers until they reach their original source, the ocean, at which point they are at peace. Thus, you see that where there is a sense of separation from the source, there is agitation and movement until the sense of separation is lost. So, it is with yourself. Now you identify yourself with your body and think that you are separate. You must regain your source. Before this false identification can cease and you can be happy. Question: what happens to the created ego after the body dies? Maharshi replies: ego is the I thought. In its subtle form, it remains a thought, whereas in its gross aspect, it embraces mind, senses, and the body. They disappear in deep sleep along with the ego, but still the self remains. It will be the same in death. Ego is not an entity independent of the self in order that it might be created or destroyed by itself. It functions as an instrument of the self and periodically ceases to function. That is, it appears and disappears as birth and death. Question: how can I control the mind? Maharshi replies: seek the mind. On being sought, it will disappear. The mind is only a bundle of thoughts. The thoughts arise because there is a thinker. The thinker is the ego. The ego, if sought, will vanish automatically. The ego and the mind are the same. The ego is the root thought from which all other thoughts arise. Dive within, you are now aware that the mind rises from within. So sink within and seek. You need not eliminate the wrong I. How can the I eliminate itself? All that you need to do is to find its origin and abide there. That is as far as your efforts can extend. Then the beyond will take care of itself. You are helpless there, no effort can reveal it. Question: how can I develop? Maharshi replies: why go on pruning the ego? That is just what it wants to be the center of attraction. The false ego is associated with objects. The subject alone is the reality. The world is seen in the light reflected by the mind. The moon shines by the reflected light of the sun. When the sun has set, the moon is useful for seeing the things. But when the sun rises, no one needs the moon, even though it is visible in the sky. So it is with the mind and heart. The mind is used for seeing objects. The self is there whether you search for it or not. The cessation of false identification reveals the self which is eternally existing. This is called realization. The blankness is evil result of searching the mind. The mind must be erased out of existence. See who the thinker is, who the seeker. who the seeker is. Then abide as the thinker, the seeker, and all thoughts will then disappear. Then ego is pure ego, purged of thoughts. It is the same as the self. Question: how can I get rid of fear? Mercy replies: what is fear? It is only a thought. When there is nothing beside the self, there is no reason to fear. Who sees anything else? The ego arises first and sees an object. If the ego does not exist, then the self alone does, and there cannot be a second. On finding the source within, there will be no doubt, no fear, and all other thoughts centering around the ego will disappear along with ego. Weakness or strength are in the mind. The self is beyond mind. Question: is there such a thing as free will? Mercy replies: questions of fate and free will arise only to those who fail to look into the root of both. To know the cause is never to entertain thoughts of either fate or free will. Everything in this universe is run by one supreme power, but if people will not keep to the destined path appointed for them, but stray beyond its limits, then God punishes them, and through that they run towards the self. But when the punishment finishes, they stop worshipping and sin again, thereby inviting an increased punishment. Agitation or anxiety is sign of having strayed from destiny, whereas on the appointed path they will remain peaceful and content. They should abide in the self and not seek to stray into desires and ambitions beyond what God gives, but be egoless. Surrender and all will be well. Throw all responsibility onto God. Do not bear the burden. What can destiny do then? If one surrenders to God, there will be no cause for anxiety. If you are protected by God, nothing will affect you. The sense of relief is in direct proportion to the reliance on God or the self. When a person surrenders as a slave to the divine, eventually there is the realization that all one's actions are the actions of God. The sense of I and mine are lost. This is what is meant by doing the will of God. Those who realize that they have lost their I-ness, ahankara, and that they are not different from Iswara, the Supreme Personal God or Jnani. Question: surrender is impossible. Ra- Maharshi Ramana: yes, complete surrender is impossible in the beginning, but partial surrender is certainly possible for everyone and will eventually lead to it. Well, if surrender is impossible, what can be done? There will be no peace of mind as you are helpless to bring it about, otherwise, it can be done only by surrender. Question: can partial surrender undo destiny? Maharshi: oh, yes, it can. Question: what is self surrender? Maharshi: it is the same as self control. Control is affected by the removal of innate tendencies of the mind, sanskaras. The ego submits only when it recognizes the higher power. Such recognition is surrender and is the same as self control. Otherwise, the ego remains like the carved image stuck upon a tower, making it appear as though it is supporting the tower on its shoulder. The ego cannot exist without the higher power but thinks that it acts of its own accord. A passenger on a train continues to hold his load on his head out of foolishness. Let him put it down. The load will reach his destination just the same. Similarly, let us not pose as the doers, but resign ourselves to the guiding power. Question: being always Sat Chit Ananda, existence, consciousness, bliss. Why does God place us in difficulties? Why did He create? Maharshi replies, does God come and tell you that He has placed you in difficulties? It is you who say so. It is again wrong. If that disappears, there will be no one to say that God created. That which is does not even say I am. For does any thought arise that I am not? Only in such a case should one be reminding oneself I am, otherwise not. For instance, does a man say always I am a man? He does not. On the other hand, if a thought arises that he is a cow or a buffalo, he has to remind himself that he is not a cow but I am a man. This would never happen. It is the same with one's own existence and realization. Maharshi Ramana, the realized man, sees himself in others. They are not different from himself. With wise people he is wise, but with the ignorant he becomes ignorant. With the children he will play, and with the learned he will be scholarly. The self realized one is not to be regarded as an idler or a lazy drone. His powers develop incessantly, and in the course of time, he may develop and manifest occult powers. If that is his karma, this will be merely a sort of sport for the jnani, realized one in the objective world, as he has no interest or particular purpose to serve. But if his prabodha, past karma to be worked out, is otherwise, see, these supernatural powers will not manifest, and the wise one who habitually and by nature rests in the Atma self does not seek any other path. When a person has realized a universal life current takes possession of him and he becomes an instrument in its hands. His own separate will is gone. This is the real self surrender. This is the highest Kundalini yogic power. This is real bhakti, devotion. This is jnana, knowledge of the self. The universe does not exist apart from the self. All evolution, all external objects are spun from the self and disappear into it. Where does the world disappear to when we enter deep sleep? We exist, but the world no longer exists. Self is hence the substratum which gives reality to the universe. If our self did not exist, there would be no universe for us. The reality is in the self, otherwise, not in the universe. Realization of this comes to realized person. The sage experiences that he is the body just as the ignorant person does. The difference is that the ignorant one believes that the self is confined to the body, whereas the sage knows that the body cannot remain apart from the self. The self is infinite for him and also includes the body. Question: does the Realized says see the world. Maharshi, yes, but his outlook differs. You are the screen, the self creates the ego has its thoughts which are displayed to the world like cinema pictures, and those thoughts are the world. But in reality, there is nothing but the self. All are projections of the ego. Cinema pictures move, but try going to hold on to them. What do you hold? Only the screen. Let the pictures disappear, and what remains? The screen again. And so it is here. Even when the world appears, the Jnani sees it only as a manifestation of the self. There is only one mind, he is functioning through the five senses. There is a power working through them, and their work begins and ends. There must be a substratum on which their activities depend, a single substratum. Question: the Jnani say, I am the body, and the Ajnani, one who has not realized the self, says, I am the body. What is the difference? Mercy replies, I am is the truth, the body is the limitation. The Ajnani limits the I with the body, and the I is sleep is apart from the body. The same I is now in the waking state. Through though ought to be in the body, I is really outside it. The wrong notion is not I am the body, for it is the I that says the body being insentient cannot. The mistake lies in thinking that I is what I is not. I cannot be the inert body. The moments of the body are confused with the moments of the I, and the result is misery. Whether the body works or not, I remains free and happy. The Ajnanis I is the body. There is the whole error. The Jnanis I includes the body, and that is all. Some intermediate entity arises and causes confusion. If you accept one philosophical system, that you are forced to condemn the others. A child and Jnani are similar. Incidents interest the child only so long as they last. It ceases to think of them after they have finished, which shows that they do not leave any imprint or impressions on the child, and it is not affected by them mentally. It is the same with the sage. There is a verse shloka in the Bhagavad Gita which says that one who acts without attachment to the senses and without egoism, even if he kills the enemy, does not make any karma. Similarly, an illumined one is free from all past karma and from all past vasanas. Inherent tendencies of the mind. How can there be karma or vasanas when the ego which causes them has been destroyed? Even if a realized person were to destroy many lives in war, no sin would touch his pure soul. So the Gita says, the realized one knows neither past, present, nor future. He is beyond time, for he lives in the timeless self. He does not plan for the future. Why should he? There is no sense of I in him any longer. He is directed by the infinite power. He will just watch and wait and see what happens. He lets things take their course and resigns all to that absolute power which you can call God, karma, or whatever you like. There is no egoism in him, so he is quiet. Question. It is claimed that the grace of Ishvara, God, is necessary. Maharshi replied, "We are Ishvara. We are Ishvara. By seeing ourselves as Him, we are having His grace. His nature is grace. Leave it to Him. Surrender unreservedly, either because you admit your inability and require a higher power to help you, or investigate, going to the source and merge in the self. God never forsakes one who has surrendered. A higher power is leading you. Let it. It knows what to do and how to do it. Trust it. Question: I pray for your grace as human effort is futile without it. Maharshi: both are necessary. The sun is shining, but you must turn and look at it in order to catch a glimpse. Similarly, individual effort is necessary as well as grace. Grace is within you. If it were external, it would be useless. Grace is the self. You are never out of its reach. If you remember the Guru, it is because you have been prompted by the self. Is not grace already there? Is there a moment when grace is not operating in you? Your remembrance of the Guru is the forerunner of grace. Grace is both the response and the stimulus. That is the self and that is grace. There is no cause for anxiety. Question: how does the Guru's grace lead to self realization? Maharshi replies, an aspirant begins with dissatisfaction. Not content with the world, he seeks satisfaction of desires. Praise to God, and his mind is purified. His longing to know God is greater than his wish to satisfy his carnal desires. It is then that God's grace begins to manifest. He takes the form of a guru and appears to the devotee, teaches the truth, and purifies the mind by his teachings and contact. The mind gains strength and is able to turn inward. With meditation, it is purified further and remains still without the slightest ripple. That expanse is the self. The Guru is both external and internal. From the outside, he pushes the mind inwards, and from the inside, he pulls the mind towards the self and helps it keep quiet. That is the grace. There is no difference between God, Guru, and self. Question: why do you not preach to set people on the right path? Maharshi: you have already decided that I do not preach. Do you know who am I and what preaching is? How do you know that I am not doing it? Does preaching consist of mounting a platform and haranguing people? Preaching is simply the communication of knowledge. It may also be done in silence. What do you think of someone listening to speech for an hour and going away unimpressed? Compare that with another who sits in the holy presence and goes away after some time with their outlook on life totally changed. Which is better, preaching loudly without effect, or sitting silently emanating intuitive forces that influence others? Question: when a man realizes the self, what will he see? Maharshi replies, there is no seeing, seeing is only being. The state of realization as we call it, is not attaining something new or reaching some goal which is far away, but simply being that which you always are and which you always have been. All that is needed is that you give up your realization of the not true as true. All of us are regarding as real that which is not real. We have only to give up this practice on our part. Then we shall realize the self as the self. In other words, be the self. At one stage, you will laugh at yourself for trying to discover the self which is so self evident. So, what can we say to this question? What is the difference between the mind and the self? Maharshi. There is no difference. The mind turned inward is the self. Turns outwards, it becomes the ego and all the world. The mind does not exist apart from the self. That is, it has no independent existence. The self exists without the mind. Never the mind without the self. Cotton made into various clothes we call by various names. Gold made into various ornaments we call by various names. But all the clothes are cotton and all the ornaments are gold. The one is real, the many are mere names and forms. Question: in what sense is happiness or bliss our real nature? Mercy. Perfect bliss is reality. Perfect peace is of the self. That alone exists and is consciousness. That which is called happiness is only the nature of self. Self is not other than perfect happiness. That which is called happiness alone exists. Knowing that fact and abiding in the state of self enjoys bliss eternally. If a man thinks that his happiness is due to external causes and his possessions, it is reasonable to conclude that his happiness must increase with the increase of possessions and diminish in proportion to their diminution. Therefore, if he is devoid of possessions, his happiness should be nil. What is the real experience of man? Does it conform to this view? In deep sleep, man is devoid of possessions, including his own body. Instead of being unhappy, he is quite happy. Everyone desires to sleep soundly. The conclusion is that happiness is inherent in man and is not due to external causes. One must realize happiness. Question: how shall I reach the self? Maharishi. There is no reaching the self. If self were to be reached, it would mean that the self is not here and now and that it is yet to be obtained. What is what is got afresh will also be lost, so it will be impermanent. What is not permanent is not worth striving for. So I say the self is not reached. You are the self, you are already that. The fact is, you are ignorant of your blissful state. Ignorance supervenes and draws a veil over the pure self which is bliss. Attempts are directed only to remove this veil of ignorance which is merely wrong knowledge. The wrong knowledge is the false identification of the self with the body and the mind. This false identification must go, and then the self alone remains. Therefore, realization is for everyone. Realization makes no difference between the aspirants. This very doubt whether you can realize and the notion I have not realized are themselves the obstacles. Be free from these obstacles also. Question: of what nature is a realization of Westerners who relate that they have had flashes of cosmic consciousness? Mercy. It came as a flash and disappeared as such. That which has a beginning must also end. Only when the ever present consciousness is realized will it be permanent. Consciousness is indeed always with us. Everyone knows I am. No one can deny his own being. The man in deep sleep is not aware. While awake, he seems to be aware, but it is the same person. There is no change in the one who slept and the one who is now awake. In deep sleep, he was not aware of his body, and so there was no body consciousness. In the wakeful state, he is all aware of his body, and so there is body consciousness. Therefore, the difference lies in the emergence of body consciousness and not in any change in the real consciousness. There is no one who does not say I am. The wrong knowledge of I am the body is the cause of all the mischief. This wrong knowledge must go. That is realization. Realization is not acquisition of anything new, nor is it new faculty. It is only removal of all camouflage. The ultimate truth is so simple. It is nothing more than being in the pristine state. This is all that need be said. Question: does my realization help others? Mercy: yes, certainly. It is the best help possible, but there are no others to be helped. For a realized being sees only the self, just like a goldsmith estimating the gold in various items of jewels sees only gold. When you identify yourself with the body, then only the forms and shapes are there. But when you transcend your body, the others disappear along with your body consciousness. Question: having heard the truth, why does not one remain content? Mercy: because innate mental tendencies, sanskaras, have not been destroyed. Unless the sanskaras cease to exist, there will always be doubt and confusion. All efforts are directed to destroying doubt and confusion. To do so, their roots must be cut. Their roots are the sanskaras. These are rendered ineffective by practice as prescribed by the Guru. The Guru leaves it to the seeker to do this much so that he might himself find out that there is no ignorance. Hearing the truth is the first stage. If the understanding is not firm, one has to practice reflection, manana, and uninterrupted contemplation, nidhi dhyasana. On it, these two processes course the seeds of sanskaras so that they are rendered ineffective. Some extraordinary people get unshakable jnana, knowledge of the self, after hearing the truth only once. These are the advanced beginners take longer to gain it. Question: why do I feel unhappy when I am in valor and feel peace in your presence? Maharshi: can the feeling in this place be bliss? When you leave the place, you say you are unhappy. Therefore, this peace is not permanent. It is mixed with unhappiness which is felt in another place. Therefore, you cannot find bliss in place and in periods of time. It must be permanent in order that it may be useful. It is your own being which is permanent. Be the self, and that is bliss. You are always that. The self is always realized. It is not necessary to seek to realize what is already and always realized. For you cannot deny your own existence. That existence is consciousness, the self. So this video ends here. Please like, comment and share the video and subscribe the channel. Thanks a lot. Namaskar my dear friends. Namaskar.